Hey, welcome back to the BGX podcast. My guest today is a board game designer and has released some amazing games. So, welcome to the show, Mondo. Really appreciate you being on today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. How's things been going for you?
Things are going okay, pretty good. We're buying a house,
Oh, okay.
moving, and having a baby all within a month. So crazy, to say the least. But
Lots of life events all at once. That's
yeah,
incredible.
it seems to be how they happen. It's like
Yeah.
it's just one thing. It's always all of them at once. But
Right.
yeah.
So Mondo, talk to me about just kind of introduce yourself and talk about how you got into board gaming in the first place.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Mondo Davis. I'm a board game designer. I've been designing for about 6 years. I currently have 6 games under contract, none of which have been released in retail yet, but those should start dropping here in the fall of this year, hopefully. But I got into board games actually, kind of as a more heavy sort of hobby, experience, whatever word I should use there, through designing actually. So I started out not really having any idea what board games were all about, but I had an idea for a board game, and I tried to make it. And through making that and asking a lot of questions, I was kind of introduced to the whole hobby and of board games and the whole world that exists,
Wow.
and haven't really looked back. So
That's incredible. So talk to me about that journey of kind of creating your first game. I mean, what were some of the things, preconceptions maybe you had that you had to learn from?
yeah, I mean, and I'm not exaggerating when I say I really had like no idea what a modern hobby strategy board game really was. I played the games that a lot of us probably played growing up, as far as Risk and Monopoly and those types of games, and but wanted to make something that was a little bit more detailed. It was kind of like a space exploration game that was based off of an old computer game that I used to play, and was met very quickly with some of the challenges of doing more complex things on the design side, and also making all of the mistakes that new designers make. Chief of which was, only play testing the game with my friends and my family who didn't really know or understand games either. So the feedback I got was overwhelmingly positive and encouraging, but more from like I can't believe you made a board game standpoint, not like I have any idea what a good board game is.
Yeah.
And this is really good. So anyway, I took that feedback and all of that kind of encouragement and validation that I got, and went and tried to pitch the game to major publishers, and found out pretty quickly that the game wasn't that good. But through that process, learned about what it's all about, as far as iterating and playtesting and pitching and everything that kind of comes with being a designer. So I didn't actually sign my first game till about 3 years after that, and that was Colorfield, which is due out in fall, as I mentioned. But yeah, kind of haven't really been into much else since I started designing games, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible to hear, and such a unique kind of sub niche, I guess, of this hobby is the design side. So, if there's any aspiring game designers out there who are looking to start making their own games, what advice would you have for them just to sort of get rolling and get those first few maybe not so great games out of the way so they can get to their masterpiece?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that is kind of the core of advice I would give is just not expecting to be any good at it when you start, and being okay with that. I think that I was fortunate enough to be able to eventually surround myself with other designers that were established and were really good, and came to realize pretty quickly that I had a lot to learn and a lot of growing to do as a designer, which I think that approach really helped me because I was not hesitant in asking questions or, really like digging in. Like when I heard a phrase I didn't understand, like actually going and asking what that meant, or if I didn't understand a certain part of the process, like asking a lot of questions. I think that posture really served me really well. And I recommend that. Like, yeah, your first couple games aren't going to be good, and that's okay, but they'll get good the more and more you do it. So, I mean, the other kind of standard advice is just play a lot of board games. You got to know what other designers are doing and what exists in the board game design space. And also you kind of need an arsenal of ideas and solutions to problems that you're going to encounter that other designers have already encountered.
Yeah.
And engage in the community is the last thing. Like, get involved with other designers and playtesting groups locally or at conventions or whatever you can find, and just kind of immerse yourself in that community, because it's a really collaborative, encouraging space to be in. So
yeah, what do you see as some of the big mistakes that new designers make, or even some experienced designers? I mean, what are the things that people should really be aware of and sort of steer clear from?
I mean, I think that, like, aiming really, really high when you start, as far as I mean, I just from a complexity standpoint, like starting out with the intention of making the next Terraforming Mars or the next Twilight Imperium or something.
Right.
I've played a lot of games from new designers that that's kind of what they're going for. Like, they're trying to make something that's as deep and interesting as those types of games, and it's just not there, and it's kind of a slog, and it's like I think starting small is a great idea. Starting with, like, how can I design interesting mechanics? How can I make pieces move on the table in interesting and consequential ways? And then building up from kind of an established understanding of that micro level of what games should be. Yeah, I mean, I see that, and I also see, like I said, I think not getting your game in front of a diverse group of playtesters doesn't serve the progress that you need. You need a lot of opinions of people that know what they're talking about, but also very different types of people and different types of gamers. It's gonna help the game progress exponentially.
So where do you find playtesters? I mean, obviously you can go to your friend group, but as you mentioned, that's sometimes not the best demographic. I mean, do you just go to your local game store and put your thumb up outside the window and ask people to come in, or what's your strategy for getting a good playtest group together?
Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with playing with your friends or your game group or whoever you've got around. I think that's always a good first step, just to kind of figure out, like, if things work.
Yeah.
But finding other people to play it, and people that aren't maybe concerned about your feelings as much, or aren't just going to encourage you by default because they care about you. Like, that's just gonna be really helpful. And I think that there are, just about in every metropolitan area, there are meetup types of events that you can find. Meetup.com, local game stores, like you said. Also the conventions, there's like the bigger conventions for designers, like Unpub, and some of the spiels. But then there's also usually like smaller kind of annual get-togethers. Like we have one in Atlanta that's a few hundred people, called Proto ATL, which was just earlier this month. So looking for opportunities like that is really great. But also I think online is really the best resource that you can have. There are so many designer groups on Facebook and Discord that get together regularly to play test each other's games, usually through Tabletop Simulator or one of those platforms. And I mean, if you were to jump into those, you could play test your games every single night digitally, if you string together the different groups that are available. Right. So there's a lot of good resources out there for that, for sure.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, again, such a deep hole, I feel like, with design that, I feel like a lot of people just don't even know about it, and,
Sure, yeah.
might seem daunting at first, right?
Oh yeah. There's a lot of us. We are dozens or hundreds.
So talk to me about designing kids games. You had mentioned that one of your piece of advice for new designers is to keep things simple at first, and don't go for the huge box with 1,000 components. Does that mean go for a kids game, or is it more go for a casual game, or are kids games harder to design in your opinion?
I mean, yeah, that's a good question. I think what I mean is, like, if any game that you play, you can typically strip down what's going on into some central turn mechanic. So, you know, in Sushi Go, it's drafting cards, or it's the scoring of Sushi Go, or in Sagrada, it's, you know, the like puzzle of the dice that you're doing. So I think that's what I mean is finding that little simple thing that's really interesting, that you can then build a game around. Because obviously Sagrada is not just putting dice onto a mat; it's also the, you know, the tools, and it's the scoring conditions, and it's the draft, and it's all these things kind of together. But I think that a big development in my kind of process has been to focus more on how do I make those interesting mechanics as, you know, kind of these small pieces, and then putting those together into a bigger thing, versus like, I'm going to start with this, you know, giant kind of universe world building idea, and then try and like build mechanics up to fit it.
Right.
So that's kind of what I mean. I think that designing kids games is probably actually harder than designing games for you know, older folks, like you know, adults, and that's because of the cognitive limitations of children are hard to design for. I mean, it's hard to make an interesting thing that kids can like psychologically, developmentally do.
Yeah.
And that's why the games that work with kids work really well with kids, because they are fun and interesting for kids. And it's kind of hard to find one that parents want to play too. I haven't been able to do that yet, I don't think, but
you're right, definitely. My son tonight was begging to play Hungry Hippos, and so we dragged it back out for the you know, 20th time this month.
Which I mean, I think it's good, because, you know, if like I have a 4-year-old daughter, and I try and introduce new like games that are interesting to me, that are also kind of a level appropriate for her.
Sure.
But it's really, I think like it's good just building kind of the routine of like, hey, we play games together. That's just what we do.
Right.
And like right now it's Hungry Hippos, but maybe in a couple of years we'll, you know, pull out Catan Junior or something.
Yeah.
But like, you know, when you got that culture, I think that that's something I want to focus on building with my kid. But yeah.
Definitely.
There's a place for all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and you know, there's always the option to have them play on your team in a more advanced game, but you know,
sure.
That'll only hold their attention so long, it seems sometimes. So,
yeah,
I feel like one of the other things I've seen with some designers that I know, and you know, I've play tested a few games, is one of the mistakes I think gets made is they try and put too many mechanics in, like, you know, they try and, you know, and then you're going to roll a dice for that, and then you're going to lay a tile, and then you're going to play a card, and you're going to like, and it's like, there's too many, like you're trying to put every trick in the bag in one, as opposed to, you know, let's make a compelling game that has a storyline or something, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that as for a new designer, that feels like more of a tendency for someone that's just starting out, because I mean, the best part about designing is coming up with ideas for what to do. And then once you start implementing it, you have to start chipping away at that. But I think that as I've been doing this for a lot of years, I've come to understand that, like, if I have to take something out of a game, that's okay, because that thing that I'm taking out, whether it's a mechanic or a character or whatever it is, like I can plug that into my next design, or I can build another game around that thing. So I don't have to use every idea that I have into one game. Like I want to just whittle it all down to the best idea for that game, and then like trust that, you know, the next time there's a space more appropriate for whatever it is, then I've got it, you know, it's there.
Yeah,
but yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I play tested a card game that a friend of mine is working on, and you know, it's sort of a Magic the Gathering type game and a little bit of a different layout, but it was like, you know, every third card you played, you have to roll a d20, and then you have to flip a coin here, and you got to move this thing there, and it just got to be so many things, and I'm like, you guys are gonna have to have like a really advanced neoprene play mat so I can keep track of all this stuff, because I don't know what's, you know, like. Yeah. You're like, oh, you forgot to roll your die. Like, yeah, because this is my first time playing it. Like, you gotta, you know, give me a little bit of visual cues here. So,
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So, a lot going on for sure.
But really, it's so fun coming up with ideas. Like,
yeah,
it's hard to like to come to that understanding. I think of like, yeah, I don't need to put every idea into every game. Like, let's get rid of as much as we can and whittle it down to the best parts. So He'll get there, I'm sure. But
Yeah, and that's it's something interesting that I've talked about before. But when you are in a playtest session and you're getting some of that critical feedback of, hey, I don't love this, and this doesn't really make sense. Sometimes these games, I'm sure, can take a long time to develop, and you've spent countless hours on them, and then for someone to kind of turn around and tell you like, meh, that I'm sure that can be tough to swallow at times. So, what's your advice? As you're receiving that feedback, I mean, how do you take that and not let it get to you personally?
well, I think one, it necessitates a lot of playtesting, because in in a scenario where I'm spending hours and hours and hours developing something and nobody else is playing it, like it's more realistic that I'm going to get to that point where it's like, all right, I finally put it in front of somebody and they're like, ugh, there's things here that don't work, and I'm like, oh right, obviously, but I didn't have, like, I had my blinders on and I didn't see that, so I just spent all this time developing something that doesn't work. So I think playtesting as you go is really important, but also, like, I don't know. I mean, I think critical feedback is great. Like, I absolutely love when people tell me what they really feel about the games of mine that they play, because it's the only way for me to, like, understand what needs to change and what needs to improve and what needs progress. So I think if you can detach kind of your feelings from your game design, I think that that's something that comes with time, and it's not automatic or easy, but I think that that really helps, because if I can just hear what someone's saying, like, analyze it, apply it, understand it, and it's going to help my game improve, and that's what I want. Ultimately, that's what I'm after. So I don't get. I've come to a point where I don't get offended when somebody tells me that something in my game is bad. It's actually like an endorphin rush of, like, awesome. Now I know that. Now I know that you felt that way when this happened. Like, is that something I want to pursue? I can make a decision then, like, okay, this person's right, this person's wrong, whatever. But anyway, like, the critical feedback, I think, is something that you really come to appreciate and, like, really understand the need for, the more and more you do it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So for people who are out there playtesting games, I mean, sometimes that can be an awkward situation too. It's like, I have a lot to say, but I don't want to be too critical and become offensive. I mean, what would you say to those people who are sitting at the table playtesting? How honest should they be, and how quickly should they give their first impressions and thoughts as they go?
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends on the designer, obviously. I think that when I play test other people's games, I'm always very upfront with what type of feedback do you want. Like, is this a finished game that you are, like, mostly happy with, but you just want to tweak some things, or are you trying out something new for the first time and you want to know how I feel about it? Like, having that understanding going into the playtest is really helpful, because then I'm able to give them feedback that they actually want to hear. And then also like, being empathetic and understanding, like, hey, not everybody is ready to hear all of the criticism that you might have. So finding ways to give the criticism that they might need to hear in sensitive ways that, is, again, empathetic to how they might receive it, I think is important. But that's kind of just like a human life skill too, right? Like, being able to, like, be honest without crushing people's feelings.
Right.
So it very much applies. I mean, when I play test with other designers that I know have been designing for a while, like, it's a lot safer of a space for that to just be like, hey, this is bad and you shouldn't do this, or this didn't work and I hated this. Because I know that, like I said, like, they're after the same thing that I'm after. They want that feedback as well. But when I'm playtesting with new designers, I try to ask a lot of questions to understand exactly, like, where this designer is as far as what they're ready to hear, or what they want to hear, or what they need to hear. And then just trying to make, like, sensitive, kind of informed decisions about how to share the feedback that I have. So just be a good human, I guess, is the
right.
summary.
That's the end goal, right? Absolutely. So when you're designing a game, do you feel like just maybe personal preference, do you feel like the story is important, or are the mechanics more important, or is it some combination of the two? I mean, where do you weigh on that?
So I've had the most success having a mechanics first approach. I find that part really fun and interesting, of just putting pieces on a table without any theme in mind at all, and just moving things around and, like, trying to find interesting sequences or decisions that I can make just using dice or cards or whatever. But then it's really important then, if I find something like that, to find a story that fits that mechanic, which again, I found some success with, and I think is really rewarding, being able to like have this turn structure. You know, I move this dice from here to here, or I stack these cards on top of each other like this. What does that feel like? Like, what does it feel like I'm doing? And then finding a theme that way, because I think that you can tell interesting stories and focus on narrative through really strong mechanics. If you start with really strong mechanics, and then you know, really kind of think creatively about the story that those mechanics can tell. So every designer is going to have a different answer to that, and that's okay. That's why there's so many different types of games out there. But for me, yeah, I want the mechanics to be really strong, and then have, you know, kind of creative license to identify something, a story, a theme that fits the mechanics.
Yeah. Do you have sort of a backlog of, you know, themes, I guess, or like game ideas that you're like, I would really love to do this type of game someday, but you don't know where that's going to fit into your timeline?
Yeah, I've got a running list. Anytime I have an idea, I'll just kind of jot it down. Because, you know, I mentioned moving and having a baby and all that. So now's a good example of a time when I really don't have any time to start something new. I've got to like finish the projects I'm working on.
Right.
But yeah, every day I'll get some idea of like, oh, it'd be fun to do a game about this, and then I'll just kind of jot it down and leave it there for whenever I have time. So yeah, I've got a list that's probably a couple pages long.
Right.
Little one line, like a game about, you know, whatever, fill in the blank. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Oh no, there's one. I'm gonna mess the story up, but there's during World War II, there was a squadron of like Polish soldiers that trained a bear. So they had like a squad bear that was like the pet, that I don't know if they sent them on like missions to sniff things out. I don't know the whole story, but I want to make a game about that. Okay. I don't know what it'll be. I don't know what, like, but it's about training a bear to like be a part of your brigade or something.
Wow.
Anyway, stuff like that.
Right.
Like, it's
well,
just,
hey,
you know,
coming soon from Games by Mondo, right? So
not soon, but maybe
right, someday. So where do you draw your inspiration for the ideas you come up with? I mean, is it things you see in your life, or, you know, where does those things come from?
Yeah, I mean, you know, like I said, I start with mechanics, but when I am trying to apply a narrative theme to the mechanics that I've developed, I do draw from places I've been, or you know, like I've just worked on a game about kind of Cuban culture, and my wife and her family are Cuban, so that's an example of that. One of the games I signed is called Sorrento, which is like a house stacking game that's signed with Weird Giraffe. But I visited Sorrento, so I had this mechanic of like stacking things, and I was like, oh, this kind of feels like I'm building a city that's like on a hill. Sure. And Sorrento, Italy was a place that I went on my honeymoon. So absolutely, like I think that that's a lot of fun to draw on those experiences, because it does make the, you know, it's more engaging, like on a personal level, to build games around those feelings and experiences that I've had. So actually, I think it's probably just about every game I've ever have signed, at least, because I have Color Field is a game about painting, and my wife's a watercolor artist. Oh, okay. I have a game called Saving Small Town that came from being kind of sad about the hometowns of my grandparents just sort of disappearing. So I wanted to make a game about it. Sorrento, I have a game called Big Sur that I signed. It's a card laying game where you're building the Pacific Coast Highway. I used to live out there in Monterey, California, and drove on, you know, through Big Sur all the time. So yeah, like that's absolutely probably a lot more central to my process than I realized until just now. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, well, there you go. So how many projects would you say that you're working on at a time? I mean, are you hunker down on one game until it's finished, or do you sort of have a lot of things in progress at a time? What's your process for that?
Typically, I would say I'm probably at like 5 or 6 at a time. Never two games that are in the same stage, but usually like one I've just recently started, one that I've maybe play tested once, one that I've play tested a handful of times, one that I'm like about ready to pitch, and one that I'm pitching. In that spectrum somewhere. I have games that I have finished that I am like pitching, and there's about 8 of them right now that I'm actively trying to pitch and to publishers. So I wouldn't count those in the process because I'm not actually working on them. But usually, yeah, 5 or 6. Again, recently with kind of the craziness of the last month and the coming month, I'm focused on 2, which is not much for usually what I'm used to. But yeah, I mean, you kind of like it's good to have multiple projects too, because very often you'll come to a point where like you just can't figure something out. I know for me, and I this is true of other designers as well. It's good to just be able to leave it. It's good to be able to just walk away from something for an amount of time, and then come back to it kind of with a fresh look. So having other things to work on is really conducive to that, because it's like, I'll just stop this because I can't figure this thing out, go work on this other one that I've got all these ideas for, and then after a couple of weeks or whatever, come back and it's like, okay, now I'm kind of refreshed and ready to look at this with new eyes. So I think that's productive in my experience. But yeah.
So, again, speaking to like, if it's a new game designer out there, how do they figure out that process of, okay, first I got to develop a mechanic, and then, and then what, and how do I get to that final stage of I'm ready to go pitch to publishers or self-publish, which I know is becoming popular. So how do you sort of navigate through that whole journey? I mean, is it different per designer, or is there an overall, sort of widely accepted process for that?
No, I mean, I don't think there's a, I don't think there's a universal process for all or even most designers, particularly with the question of what constitutes finished. Like that's a hard thing to define. I know for me, my answer to that question, which is as close as I'm going to get, is if I'm playtesting a game and the feedback that I'm getting is consistently just about, it's just aesthetic things. It's just the way the game looks or the iconography or something like that. But I'm not getting feedback on the gameplay itself, the mechanics in the game. That tells me that, all right, what I have, as long as I'm getting the experience, the reactions that I'm expecting or the emotions that I'm expecting, that tells me that it's pretty close. And I've kind of got, I tend to pitch pretty early, because I think that a lot of publishers, if you've got games under contract or you've got games out in retail stores, it's a little bit easier to do that. It's a little bit easier to say like, hey, here's this thing that I'm 75% on. And if they like the idea of it, then the conversation will start there. They might not sign it right away, but at least the conversation's going, and I can work on it with something else. Like I'm thinking like, okay, X publisher is interested. So like, what should I do to make this more of their game, kind of a thing. Some designers, the guys that are like really established and have been doing it for years and have a ton of games, like they could sell an idea basically. Like Phil Walker Harding kind of guys, like they could go to a publisher and be like, hey, I've got this very, very basic idea or basic prototype for this thing that I want to make. And they're like, cool, we'll sign it and we'll pay you to finish it. But that's not most designers. That's hard. That's very, very few. But so that's kind of the answer to that question for me. But the first part of that question was more like the process for starting it, or like the stages or whatever.
Right.
Like I said, I think that it's just important to play test along the way. Like you kind of let the, like, I think basing the progress or the trajectory of a design on feedback that you're getting from playtesters is the most effective way to do it. So that means you have to play test it. Like as soon as I have a mechanic, I'll put it in front of my game group and be like, hey, do this thing real quick with cards. What do you think? And they're like, that gives me immediate feedback of like, this is something I should keep working on, or it's not something I should keep working on, whatever. And then every stage, like get it in front of somebody, get it in front of somebody, get it in front of somebody. And then I think the progress will kind of show itself as you do that and reiterate and apply that feedback. So
yeah. When is the right time to add art, or to I guess level up the art from sort of that placeholder, sketch art that sometimes you get in the early stage to more of a final product?
yeah, I mean, I think you'll get different answers from different designers on that one too. I know for me, well, so Henry Audubon's a good example of a guy, designer of parks. He, I've had several conversations with him asking a lot of questions because he's just like expert pro. Like I really admire what he does, but he works really hard on developing his own understanding of graphic design and user interface design and stuff like that. So I think that that's an important skill set for a designer, like in tandem with designing mechanics and designing games, is like working on those other aspects, the visual representation and those skills. Because like I don't personally I haven't studied graphic design. I don't have any kind of formal training in graphic design, but like I've picked things up along the way and I apply those things as to my game design, and it kind of facilitates the design in that I don't have to run out and find somebody to do it for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm not doing professional level, finished level artwork or graphic design or any of that, but like I understand enough about it to be able to make things presentable and understandable without having to go pay somebody to do it. So I think that that's a really important skill set for designers that isn't often talked about. Like we don't usually have that conversation as designers. I don't hear it much because we want to just focus on making the game. We don't want to like go learn a whole new skill set, but developing that skill set, I think, is something that's really critical. Because what you shouldn't do, and this is an answer to your question, what you shouldn't do is run out and buy artwork for a game that isn't under contract. If you're self-publishing, that's another story. But what I do, licensing my game with publishers, it's a waste of money.
Yeah.
Frankly, it's a waste of money to buy artwork for a game that isn't under contract, that isn't signed, because the publisher that signs it is always going to replace it. Like almost 99% of the time, the artwork that you bring to a publisher is not going to end up on the final version. So being aware of that, I think that having it be presentable and having it be understandable, meaning the prototype is what you need. And if you can do that without buying artwork, and if not, you can do that without buying artwork. So I never recommend going out and buying artwork for a prototype.
Right.
Ever.
Yeah.
There's enough free resources online and images and things that you can get without paying for, legally.
Right.
To be able to do it. So.
Well, and you've mentioned several times that your goal is to license the games and sell them off to a publisher. Obviously compared to self-publishing, where you're going to get involved in the manufacturing and the advertising, marketing, all that. I know you've spoken a little bit about this in the past, but kind of draw out why you've chosen to go the publisher route as opposed to trying to self-publish.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that self-publishing is like perfectly valid. I think that it's a great way to go. I think that the benefit is that you have complete creative control over the final product, which I, as a designer that licenses games with publishers, don't have, like, just at all. I mean, I have some input, and publishers want to know what I feel about things, and they're going to ask me before they make final decisions. But ultimately, it's up to them what my game looks like at the end of it. I mean, there's some limitations to that, like there's boundaries around kind of the mechanics and that sort of thing. But self-publishing, just gives you complete control. But it's also a whole lot of extra work that has nothing to do with board game design. If you take a game to Kickstarter and it funds, you are responsible for manufacturing and distribution and marketing and all sorts of things that fall directly on whoever it is that's making self-publishing the game. So unless you have a team of people that know what they're doing, it's going to be a lot of work and a lot of learning, which, again, like, if that's what you want to do, then that's great. I think I would love to know how to do the things that someone that's successfully self-published knows how to do, but that I don't, but I just don't know it. and for me personally, I mean, I love designing games. That's my favorite creative outlet, and I want to maximize the time that I have. Because I don't do this full time. It's it's a hobby thing. It's a side gig. So every moment that I get to work on games, I want to spend designing games. So when I am able to license games with publishers, I'm able to do that because, I make the game, I give them the game, and then they take care of all of the everything, packaging and marketing and all that stuff. So yeah, I just really prefer using my time to design. So
Right. So talk me through a pitch. If you're going to a big publisher and you've got a game that you think they would like, walk me through what that process feels like. I mean, is it Shark Tank-esque where you kind of walk in the room with 5 guys and do a 2-minute pitch and then they ask you a bunch of questions, or is a little more toned down than that?
So I attended an event, a virtual event that was called Shark Tank or something Shark Tank, about games. And so designers had designs that they were pitching to a panel of industry professionals who were supposed to be giving like really hard critical feedback of the designs. The games they were being pitched. And it was just funny because like industry people are just so friendly and kind and people oriented and extroverted that it was just like this, like it wasn't that at all. It was just so like positive and encouraging, and it's like pitch or publishers and people that take pitches are very, very good at taking pitches. They're very, very good at being kind and letting people down gently when necessary. So I absolutely love giving pitches just because it's such a friendly, kind environment. Like they're just really friendly people. Like you don't get into board games as a career if you don't like being around people and interacting with people, because that's like what we do. So the people that are working for those publishing companies and taking those pitches are just friendly. They're just good people, and I've it's not uncommon for me to sit down with somebody that I just met and give them a pitch and then end up like playing a game with later, or like getting their phone number and like hanging out next time we're in the same town or whatever. It's a very low stress environment for if you're comfortable doing it, because like it's scary and intimidating the first time you do it, no matter who you're doing it with. But I do encourage new designers, like, hey, these people they're good people, they're kind people, they're not gonna step all over your heart.
Right. And no Mr. Wonderfuls in the crowd who are there to suck the life out of you, right?
Right. Yeah.
How many pitches do you think you've done at this point, if you had a ballpark?
So like in-person pitches, or like including just emails that I've sent out? Because with emails it's probably like 1,000.
Okay.
Face-to-face pitches I've probably done around 100 over the years. So kind of depending on how you define a pitch.
Right.
a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Which, I mean, that's the lifeblood, like as long as games don't get signed if I don't do pitches. So I pitch every opportunity I get. And I think a lot of designers do the same way. If I'm at a convention where there's a publisher, even if I have no connection with the publisher, I'm going to try to get a meeting to pitch to them just to see if they see something that they like. So, and to make a connection and start a relationship. So
definitely. Well, Mondo, you mentioned you have a day job, that this is more of your hobby. What do you do from 9 to 5?
I'm a teacher. I teach English as a second language at a high school here in the Atlanta area.
Wow, that's awesome. My parents are both teachers. My wife's a teacher, so I've been around schools my whole life. So that's awesome. Incredible. So,
cool.
Well, Mondo, if people want to learn more about you or find your games or see any release dates coming up, where can they find more information about you?
Sure. So Games by Mondo is my handle on TikTok. I'm pretty active, which is how we met, Phil. So Games by Mondo on TikTok. My website is mondodavis.com. It's also got links to the other socials that you can do. As far as updates, so my publishers are the ones that are primarily sending out updates. So 25th Century Games is publishing my game Colorfield, which should be coming out in the fall, and then Breaking Games is publishing my coming out in the fall. So you can follow publishers for more specific updates. But I'll be posting to TikTok as we go too. So
Awesome. All right. Well, make sure you check out Mondo and keep your eye out for more of his games coming to retail soon. Mondo, I really appreciate you being on the show today and appreciate your time. It's great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was fun.